You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast for students, graduates, and anyone else interested in ideas. Alongside regular guests and friends, we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy. Sport. Yeah, we've done this before, but when we recorded this episode last time, which was probably about 6 months ago, we had the wrong mic on. Not our greatest moment. So if we're going to try and do this again,
it's probably floating around in the ether somewhere. It's just like floating through walls, stone tape theory, something. It's a recorded ghost replay, and it will just like come out to haunt us at some point.
Yeah, you can pick up the old recording on ESP. Like that fucking
ESPN.
Right, so you're an athlete, aren't you?
Yes, I like to describe myself as someone who participates in a sport.
How long have you been doing that?
Track and field, athletics, albeit mainly the track side. About 4 years now. About 4 years.
Yeah, and you've always been kind of clued in with sport, and I'd say I haven't. For a large part of my life, I probably vehemently disliked it. I mean, it's not really true because there have always been sports I've enjoyed, but they've tended not to be the very competitive ones. But then, I've been running around Camden trying to find a pub open so I can watch the boxing. And then when you finally get into a pub and it's crowded and the atmosphere, it's fun. I've been to football matches and actually enjoyed it a lot. So I'd say, and especially since researching for this podcast 6 months ago and just very recently, I think I've kind of come to realize that there's a lot more to sport than the kind of people that say they hate sport would think. So first of all, do you know like the history of like the Olympics? I think we touched on it last time.
Yes, kind of the ancient classic Olympics.
Yeah. So ancient Greece is kind of like this Hellenistic idea that to be a good sportsman was also part of being a sort of a all-round good person.
You were an ambassador, really.
Yeah, it's like you were this great. Even like the great philosophers would show off their wrestling skills. Like Socrates was a wrestler, and Plato was a wrestler. They all used to fight each other and stuff, which is pretty cool. Of course, this all fell out of favor in Christianity because part of what they used to do in the Olympics was to sort of idolize.
Yeah, they'd worship their hero. They worship the Greek hero, false deity, and so they were.
Yeah, it was a
uproar.
Idolization of the human form of actual people as well, and more than that, Zeus. They were usually in honor of Zeus. So you can see why sport kind of fell out of favor.
Are we so vain?
Like when you think of Christian attitudes to sport throughout the age, you've got the Puritans who like banned football, and things like football are relatively new, really.
Yeah,
like a lot of sport is quite new, and when sport and I suppose philosophy kind of came back in the 18th century-ish when everything really started to pick up again, they weren't seen as congruent. They weren't seen as sort of something you'd put together.
Even something like football you mentioned, although it's internationally seen as either association football or soccer in the Americas. There was a very classical version. It was banned for quite a long time, where effectively two neighbouring villages would pick up, a big, pigs, object, and would just kind of run through villages. And the aim was just to get the ball into the opposing neighbour's territory village, really, and at any means possible. The only foul play the only way you could be penalised would be if a player was to die somehow in the process. But other than that, through any means, you could score a goal as such, and and the games could last, about anything from a few hours to a couple of days to a week sometimes. So, and apparently there is still a version of this today, somewhere in Derbyshire, I do believe, of the original old rules. You
reminded me of how the triathlon started, and I've completely forgotten last time.
Yeah.
On the very end, just before we realised the microphone wasn't recording.
Ah, yes. The running, so a marathon.
Oh, yeah.
As such, it was classically a message was delivered, and upon running a distance which was measured to be, in the end, 26.2 miles. That's where we have to point to there. Messenger dropped dead. Apparently, so there you go. Exercise is bad for you. You've heard that live there, ladies and gentlemen. Do not participate in sport or exercise. And poor citation. I can't remember which was the original town. I can't remember the name of the messenger really. So,
was there a town called Marathon?
There was a Marathon. Marathon was the outgoing.
I mean,
check on this.
You don't come to us for facts.
No.
So.
No science here.
Yeah, so this idea of athletics back in the classical period, it used to kind of reflect a sense of leadership, but also a leadership of oneself, like a sort of self-discipline. And I think I was asking you about this last time, so I'm going to ask you again. Do you think in doing the athletics, you've kind of got a sense of self-discipline, like you've come to know what you can achieve and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a fine balance to kind of realism of what you can achieve based on the things like
knowing your
genetic
limits,
disposition, or kind of ability to kind of just through trial and error practicing what you can do in certain sports, and particularly with athletics. The whole lifestyle comes with this. So aiming for the kind of the old cliche of 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. Things your diet. A balanced diet, enough rest, hydration, but the physical exercise itself, kind of a whole sort of volume versus times intensity factor as well. That's not often looked at, because you could quite often you can walk for ages, you can burn quite a lot of body fat doing this, but if there's no intensity to it, you won't progress to the next level. Your body kind of plateaus apparently after about a 6-week period from just doing the same exercise. So there's got to be some intensity to it, but there's also got to be a certain degree of volume.
Do you ever completely burn out? Have you ever just pushed yourself too hard?
Yes, yeah. Not every session by any means. Any of the kind of the technical elements, you want to be, 100% condition really to execute the correct sprinting form.
Yeah.
But there are some kind of, particularly with something like with sprinting, you get a lot of like lactic acid that's produced as a byproduct, and it can make you feel quite nauseous as such. And that is effectively, from the reaction of your physical exertion. And there are some efforts you will try and attempt till failure ultimately, and that's how you just teach your body to acclimatize.
Yeah, and I guess knowing yourself like very specifically in that physical sense kind of leads you on to other things. Once it's like if you can control one aspect of yourself in terms of how far you can push your body, knowing your limits and everything, and knowing why, I think that opens up a lot of it. Makes you more aware generally of everything. I mean, I'm speaking as someone who doesn't fucking exercise anywhere near as much as they should, but yeah, I think the people I know that do exercise, and I intend basically to do a lot of podcasts on this, because we've got even things like esports and stuff. Like a lot of people I know that do sport and do regular exercise, even if it's just things like yoga. I say even, I mean yoga is really beneficial, but like Kieran Ball with the boxing and stuff, and it's. Yeah, you can just see since they've started doing these things, and I'd say the same for you. Like you've become more aware of just everything in general. You just become
what it means to be a human being.
Oh yeah, it is. It is these holistic ideas of what it means to be a person, really. Because I think that's always been an intrinsic part of sport. I know that people didn't really see that in the sort of 1600s to 1800s. Really, that sport wasn't part of high culture, as it were. It's, preserving things like opera. But I think if you're doing sport right, you are almost doing an intellectual pursuit. You're certainly doing a moral pursuit, because I think sport teaches us a lot of things about rules and. I mean, apart from that fucking game you mentioned with the pig, like it's pretty like most of the
really just get away with anything there. I mean, someone could have died, from village football, about 2 weeks later or something, from being trampled on face down in a muddy puddle and got treble pneumonia or something. But most of them have rules. Like Yeah, within reason, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a good point that Pitts reminded me of, and I think it was this idea that it allows countries to play out hostilities. So let's say World War II has ended. Yeah. It allows them to sort of amicably, so the UK and Germany, to play out those rivalries in a much more peaceful setting.
Within a much more controlled environments, effectively. And it brings communities together. It often builds bridges. It can be very sort of divisive. We have seen kind of racial tensions in certain football matches recently. Have been unfortunately come to light recently. But in the whole, the positives outweigh the negatives. We've seen very much certain sports, particularly the international theme sports. Where quite often diplomacy can be achieved in on the playing field.
Yeah, because I think when it comes to international sports, there's much less rivalry in that sense. There are certain countries that do actually fucking hate each other, and have that very xenophobic idea of you are in that country, so therefore I hate you. But that, I think, to do that on such a scale is a lot harder usually. I think since, especially we live in a pretty multicultural country, so some of that like anti-French stuff you probably would have heard from your granddad, and anti-Scottish, you don't really hear it anymore because people are starting to realise what that doesn't work. But you do hear the local stuff, and I do hear that still. Like
neighbouring villages,
Cinderford, it's like upper lower Brookfield.
I'll never forget. I let him a loaf of bread in 1975, and he never returned it back. He didn't. So
you hear.
I've held a grudge ever since, mine.
But so I think it can help a country in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've been having some bad experiences lately though with that kind of crap. Working behind a bar. One of not the pub I work at, the other one.
Yeah.
Right? That one, they had a bunch of football lads come in. And they were up on the balconies. Like these parts of the pub are closed off. You can't get there. They had climbed over. They were chucking bottles from the top, and the riot police had to come in. It's just that side of sport. I mean, that's not really. I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to. Is this a part of sport, or is this something separate?
It's an unfortunate byproduct sometimes.
I think
this is what unfortunately puts a lot of people off sport. It's sometimes not even the sport physically itself, although it's much more physical and confrontational in nature than other sports and games. But sometimes it's the culture that comes with a particular sport that can put people off as well.
Yeah, I've never really liked the culture, and that especially. I mean, no one really likes that kind of stuff. It's that crowd mentality. I don't think anyone, unless you're in like literally in Green Street, that film with Elijah Wood. Like, I don't think anyone likes it. I think it's more of a thing that takes over people in the moment. I don't think people go. I mean, the core groups that start all that shit do, but I think it's more of a. I don't know.
Yeah, it gives a sense of identity. Part of a tribe. That's a common goal to work towards.
This is the thing, the idea of identity, and I can't identify with a footballer from God knows where, a completely different city. I mean, I don't identify with the people in my own city, and I think this is obviously a wider problem. Sort of, society becoming more plural. Less unification. We don't all believe in the same ideals, the same God, things like that. But I think, I don't know. I've just never resonated with a sportsman who's claimed to represent me. I was like, how do you represent me? But I can kind of get on board with watching a great tennis player just because it's a nice,
just an individual skill. Effectively, just the kind of the art of the game itself.
Yeah, and kind of from that way I can get into it and I can cheer and I can, really. Yeah, I think part of it is the atmosphere as well, and I don't really put myself in that atmosphere enough to appreciate it.
No, I've actually, we do not need to be as partisan as we are quite often sometimes. I mean, you wouldn't see that in a game like Tiddlywinks or something, would you? Like, come on! People just blokes banging on the desk.
Yeah.
Finish him!
Do you know what? Yeah, and when you say it's a byproduct...
referee.
I will agree, because I think it is just certain sports, isn't it, that they've just been attached to. I don't know what it is about those sports, though. You kind of get it with rugby, but you don't. It is essentially just football.
It just involves more people. A lot of these sports quite often.
Why do you think football has such a wide appeal?
It's just a well-known game. Ultimately, I mean, if I was reading into this earlier today, and apparently, an update on the supposed population of this planet now, but about 3.5 billion people are subscribed to football in some way globally. So roughly, just an approximation here, that's about half of the world's population is interested in soccer association football in that way.
Yeah.
It's far outstrips any other sport. I looked at others in the top 10 as second overall.
Yeah, as I'm constantly reminded, it's a universal language.
Yeah.
And it is. It really is. It's nice to see something uniting everyone.
Yeah.
Part of me kind of wishes it was, more things could unite us, not just that. But it is nice, and it's a relatively harmless thing in itself for people to. I mean, it's a great thing in itself for people to be interested in. What about this idea of like role models to providing?
Yes, I'm very much vouch for that as well, because again, in the kind of we'll go back to the theme of kind of the classic Olympic athletes, idolized in that way. People do see a lot of these sportsmen or women as idols. They obviously necessarily not physically part of their upbringing, but part of the kind of their transitional phase from childhood through adolescence. You could be watching the same sportsman or team in your adult years, and particularly due to kind of the working world today, where some people have very, very consistent contact with parents, seen as the classic role models, but some are less in contact with parents than others, and quite often you find you've got more access to your favourite sportsman.
The access thing's good, yeah. Especially with like social media and stuff, and they're always on the TV. It's like, and you can, and not just that, but like there are magazines for this shit. You remember like football stickers and stuff like that.
Massively, and you always see the sportsman in a. I suppose when you get older, you kind of sort of realise there's other side to it as well. That sort of newspapers and the media won't discuss until you kind of in your older years, but you always see them in a proactive light as well. They're radiant. They're a bold athlete. They're always they're proactively doing something in front of your eyes.
Yeah, whereas it's the way they're marketed.
In real life, life isn't always as dramatic as that. So that's why people
here's the thing, and
franchised.
I may have mentioned this last time, but I think that a role model isn't necessarily someone you want to copy. And I really dislike this idea that people have to be sort of paragons of virtue. Just because they play sport particularly well. I think they can be role models within their particular sport. And what I think is really kind of interesting, you mentioned like broken families and stuff, but what I think really captures people's imaginations is the whole success story element. So I think when people are pretty impoverished, they can see a sportsman who's, especially if they grew up poor as well. Yeah. And that's where the role model stuff for me, I think that's where it's most powerful, because it shows you that society, or the people in society, can transform, and that people can, it shows you there are other ways of doing stuff and other ways to be valued.
That could be me.
Yeah. But outside of money, they have a worth anyway. I mean, they're usually filthy rich, but it doesn't necessarily matter because they're also doing a thing they love. Okay, there's fame as well, but the optimist in me kind of sees this as, well, people see this great person as having a value that isn't to do with money, that's to do with, they're successful in lots of other ways other than, they're a banker or whatever. So it means that you don't necessarily have to be rich to get to that. It's kind of something they can aspire to too. But then I also don't like this idea of, a role model is someone who you can be.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always have to be copying role models. I think role models, in a more nuanced sense, are just
they're their own kind of
they have a role. They just have a role in our lives to show us certain things. Usually it's imparting some kind of lesson, but it doesn't mean they're teaching you a lesson. So one of the this is a bit of a tangent, but one of the examples I liked is a guy who was doing a talk for the humanist group we used to run. I think he mentioned this idea. He had a teacher who would stand in the hallway and just wait for kids to run along. Yeah, because loads of teachers would shout or like run after kids and be like, "Don't run!" But this guy, just big, massive rugby player guy, just fucking stood on the corner. So as they came around, you just smack into him. So right there, it's like they don't want to be that guy, but this guy is just in their life, imposing this, playing a role and teaching them something in the process, or making them learn something. Rather, he's not like actively teaching them; he's not sitting them in a classroom or anything. No. But yeah, I prefer that element because it's very hard to teach people what a moral is. It's like when you try and teach people fables or morals, it doesn't always work. So I think it's best to just have that.
Just giving them a real life lesson.
Yeah, there. Exactly.
In everything, he's sort of indirectly he's preparing them. He probably see that as he is preparing them for what they will face in the working world, perhaps. As well, or in the street when they're older.
Yeah, it's just a nice little.
Rather than trying to be their mate or something, which quite often people try and always do. You don't necessarily, need to do that. In fact, was the old saying that particularly not just athletes in general, but famous, celebrated people, you shouldn't always meet your hero.
No, and
often had bad experiences with that before.
And I definitely mentioned this last time, but there was that guy who I think he was a manager of a team. This is a big story a while ago, and he was like getting a KFC or some shit, and the car opposite him was like filming him, and he spat at them, and everyone was like, "Oh, he's let everyone down. He's a role model." No, he's not a role model. He just does. He's just this guy who was really pissed off. Okay, he shouldn't have spat.
He shouldn't have spat. He had a understandably human reaction in a heated moment of confrontation. So
I just offered Zach a cider. That was what that was. Yeah, carry on.
I do like a cider. I do. Wow. It's in the heat of the moment. You could kind of see kind of both sides of the story, but in hindsight, it's all very well for us to all be wise after the event. He shouldn't have done it.
Yeah,
you can see why he did it in the moment, but.
Yeah,
bearing in mind his position, he portrayed himself in a bad light. But does he need to impress everybody?
Exactly. I don't think the idea of just having a high-profile job in the media means you have to be somebody that people necessarily look up to in a moral sense. I like the fact that the media pressures everyone to be, on their best all the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's not someone that, especially younger people, should try and copy. Like he does like that's a very hard thing to be anyway. That's like, I think teachers need to do that, and that's what makes their job incredibly difficult. But like I don't think that many people do. It's like when people talk about films, Wonder Woman was supposedly this now Wonder Woman is a role model
in a physical capacity, or
she's just a woman. Like, I don't know. This is what I mean. It's like you can't be Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman doesn't really teach. It's just a film. Like, I don't.
She ain't kind of really real, is she? Like,
well, we just chuck the word role model on everything. It's like, well, what? First of all, what are we saying?
It is overly used.
But in the respect I mentioned, it is the money aspect, socio-economic stuff. That I think that's where sportsmen come into their own and really are role models, because they show us that. First of all, it's not all about money, but also if you don't happen to have a lot of money, it doesn't. Yeah, you can transcend that. There are always alternatives. There are always paths, and it shows people that it's good to have a craft, a skill, or it's something you can do that isn't.
Some people just appreciate sportsmen and athletes because they have kind of almost reached the pinnacle of what is almost technically possible. What's kind of like saying scientifically possible, or within kind of human abilities, but also there's an art to it as well.
Yeah,
it's a performance as well.
Yeah,
some things you can't like quantitatively describe on how well someone's particularly playing in a certain game or sport. You just just know that what you like, you see ultimately.
Particularly in the modern Olympics, a lot of that stuff is spectatory. It's a spectacle.
Yes. Yeah.
Just checking the it's recording this time.
Yeah, we've got PTSD from this, because we find out that this is actually not mic number 2 that I'm speaking into, and instead we've accidentally plugged it into a cucumber or something. This would cause us probably wake up screaming in the middle of the night. So
So in terms of the kind of where sport sits in philosophy now, it's only really in the 60s that people started to do some serious work into it. And honestly, I was Googling for this kind of stuff, looking at papers and things. There's not that much available on the philosophy of sport in general. Something I never really came across. I think that's a twofold problem, really. I mean, I've talked before about academia and how it just kind of wraps up knowledge and keeps it locked away in its ivory tower. And it's like, who the fuck is that for? There are all these papers that never get read. And also, very weird thing. So it's kind of a contractual obligation for people who are academics to contribute papers.
Yeah.
So they have to contribute these papers. They don't get paid. Now, if you want to read their papers, you have to pay if you're not already in the academic system.
Yeah.
So that's just like free money for these places that store all these online journals.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre, and that's to me, that kind of stuff is everything wrong with academia.
Yeah.
I think on the other
man takes the big cut.
Exactly. It's commercialized, and also it's just sort of stuck doing nothing practical. But then also, I kind of think it's also sportsmen and women. It's on them and sports organizations to promote a wider idea of how sport can contribute to culture and society. I think they do a relatively good job of it already. I never came across it until way after I'd left school. Really, I never really. I think maybe one of the PE teachers might have said something about the history of the javelin as we were lobbing it at each other.
Kind of, it was we were throwing the javelin at each other rather than intended target, which was out in the field whilst we were spearing each other.
Well, that's just a fact, isn't it? That doesn't. It was basically just the favourites. Especially rugby. It's like, why am I doing this? It's for freezing my tits off here.
There's no sense. I've calculated the risk reward element in my head, and I've worked out that there is a 20% chance that I'll get hypothermia at this January rugby session. While you're thinking all this, a massive guy just nails you into a wet, muddy puddle anyway. So.
Yeah, it's like I could be doing actual work, or I could be like having fun, like down the pool club or something. I don't want to be I don't want to be out in the frost and the dew, like skidding around in the mud with a stud through my hand.
Actually, what is the point of sport? And you mentioned the kind of the philosophy of sport. Classically, you've been looking into this more than me in terms of the classic philosophy of sport, and you've come up with not too much. Really, you do have to kind of look to modern answers, really. I mean, in the last decade or so, I'll probably extend this to about 20 years, there's been a lot more research into sports science and sports through quantitative and quantitative.
Yeah, that's a big thing at the moment. Yeah, sports science.
Lots of products, performance analysis. Now that we've become more computerized since the turn of the millennium, we can kind of track data on performance output as well. Sport itself, it apparently does have a definition. There's a definition that I've found somewhere, and it's not just a couple of websites singing from the same hymn sheet here. It looks like an accepted definition by the Oxford English Dictionary here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Sport, noun, an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. You could probably, I guess, without replace maybe exertion, physical exertion and skill with possibly and or, I'd probably say. Was to amend that.
Do you know what? That's a good amendment, yeah. Skill definitely. Yeah, physical exertion, no, because... I mean, mental exertion, because that kind of does throw esports out of the.
Yeah, it throws esports. It throws your typical kind of pub sports as well. Any kind of games, ultimately things like classic snooker, darts, chess. People have that kind of this age-old debate: is chucking a dartboard, really does that count as sport? But
I think classically it would have been called a game rather than a sport. Because I don't think. Actually, kind of calling dominoes a sport is a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, based on the research into sports, it really kind of the philosophy, what's the rationale behind it today? There's been a lot of research to suggest that if not, improving your lean muscle mass or helping you to kind of regulate your weight or hormones through kind of fat loss as such, it can improve your bone density. That's on the physical side, your aerobic capacity as well. Mentally, it has been proven to increase cognitive function. I think there's more kind of a United Kingdom guideline here of the chief medical officer that advises you have 150 minutes of moderate intensive exercise per week as such, and this can improve the grey matter in your brain as such, increase cognitive function, reflexes as well, but also delay the onset or sometimes prevent dementia, for example. There's been a lot of research into that.
Well, I used to hike, as you know. You used to come on a lot of them, a lot of long walks in the woods and hills near where we grew up. Since I started working, especially because I suffer with attention deficit disorder, so not doing exercise really makes that a lot worse. But even just working in a fast-paced bar, suddenly my brain's a lot more switched on, especially if I'm doing a lot of leaning down, lifting, literally running around. If it gets, the busier it gets, the more alert I am. And it's because all because of that physical exertion. Because I could be mentally busy and still have that problem, but it's after and I have been I have done a few runs and things, and especially when I go for a walk, the time after that, I'm just a lot more. All that brain fog is just a lot clearer, at least.
Quite often, I find if I need sort of clairvoyance in making decisions, use a very non-scientific term here, brain fart, for example. If I have more of those one day, okay, maybe I've rested myself physically one day when I'm not training, but if I've not really achieved anything during that day itself, I'm more likely to make very lackadaisical decisions, and there's no kind of almost so rationale or logic to any decisions that I make. Lack of coordination sets in. Lack of strategic planning, just forgetting things, dropping things on the floor. I find I do more of that, on a day where I've rested because I haven't trained my brain to do anything that day. I don't have any momentum. I've not woken up my kind of neurological.
Yeah, and the stuff at jogging is just a great cure for anxiety and stuff as well. It's gets you doing something.
Absolutely. And apparently you mentioned walking as such. That is still the most subscribed activity in the country as well. At the moment, according to Sport England, 60 around six, the nearest whole integer here, 62% of us are described as physically active in some way, falling under that kind of definition of the 150 minutes minimum quota per week, while just over a quarter are completely physically inactive, and of which walking is the most subscribed activity.
Fair enough.
And then football behind that, I believe.
Right, yeah. So I was going to ask, did any of these sort of wider philosophy ideas, because I mentioned I have this problem with philosophy not really taking sport very seriously until the 60s, and then even then, it's not something that comes up in a philosophy degree or a master's or anything. It's something you have to track down. You have to do a lot of hunting to find. And I mean, the philosophy of sport, just to clarify what that might look like, it's not just obviously there have been philosophers that have written on subjects like competition and communal aspects and things like that, and gatherings and spectacles. But it's also it's looking at sport and what it does for society partially, but also looking at its very unique ethical context, the sense of fair play and things. It's pretty much exclusive to sport, and I think these are all very good ideas. But it's also, I think philosophy is also something that's lived. It's not just something that's sat about and talked. And I think it's also the purview of sports people to promote thinking as well. So have you come across any sort of ideas about what it means to be an athlete, or ever any sort of intellectual stuff, or I mean not necessarily intellectual, but
sort of more sort of like classically seen as kind of academic?
Yeah, like just thesis, really. The whole sense of why you do this and whatever. Does that come up a lot on the track?
People do occasionally sort of justify, why they're doing it. A lot of people, do it just, for this kind of the reasons we've discussed before, kind of improved, their mental, physical well-being. But beyond that, a lot of people really tend not to kind of just justify or kind of critically analyze why they're doing it, really, in a way. Is it because I'm good at it? I mean, often there is, a lot of people do specialize in certain disciplines because, let's be honest, they're quite good at it. Yeah, and it's nice to do things you're good at. There's no point, although we always like an underdog as such. If you're coming last in something every single time, it's probably not for you. If you've been doing it for sort of 10, 20, 30 years. But it doesn't mean you necessarily have don't enjoy that, not like the challenge. But yeah, some people it's just because they like doing it. Sometimes because maybe not peer pressure, but their friends or family. Often the amount of times that I will see people who follow a similar either career path or sport, basically because their friends or their parents did it ultimately. So it's always kind of the power of suggestion. They're going to be brought up in that environment. Yeah. So they're more likely to get involved there and build confidence. Because it seems like if you just wanted to exercise, you just do a couple of push-ups and go for a run. But it seems to me that they kind of want something else out of it. It would be nice to see more sort of, I guess, amateur athletes and semi-professional athletes have that discussion. I think it's fairly self-evident in some respects what sport does on a very surface level, and I would, to be honest, I say it's self-evident, but I would have benefited from hearing this when I was growing up, because it's like, literally, why am I here on this rugby pitch? So I think if somebody told me, like, yeah, right, all these chavs are going to fucking try and stamp on you, but there are reasons why it's important to probably get a little bit stamped on, to face that, and to, it's not so much about, I mean, probably in my context, it was a little bit. Imagine teachers endorsing that on on the curriculum. You should probably get stamped on, Connor. No, I know. I think some of these ideas about pushing yourself, you don't need to get full fucking intellectual, and it's literally just about pushing yourself, disciplining yourself, knowing your limits, knowing what you can do, but also kind of testing each other, inquiring to each other, like, what are you made of? Like, let's have a go, let's see how good you are at this, and learning that the way to compete with each other healthily. It's just learning how to be a person. It's in its entirety. So I think when you phrase sport like that, it's like, well, why would anyone not want to do sport? But I think there are sides to sport that definitely are toxic, hooliganism and stuff, and a lot of bravado and stuff. But then when you really get down to it, I think sport can really provide. Yeah, it just takes people a while to kind of discover something they like, quite often as well. There's lots of people, that some people just want to be the best. Some people are kind of on a personal journey, shall we say, to find within their own limits. Yeah. That's personally the angle that I take. I want to find out how fast I can sprint a quarter of a mile around a track. I'm not particularly interested whether I come first or last in a race. And a lot of people say, oh no, come on, Zach, of course you want to win a race. Yes, but I would rather finish in last place and get a personal best. Yeah. Kind of a long-term investment than run against, not being too mean, some people that are really kind of very young, maybe undeveloped, or kind of very old
Guy with one leg,
You want, sort of, and win the race, but run a time that I know that I'm capable of running much faster.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, absolutely. I think I've heard you say that before, and I think that to me is the essence of sport, really. You were saying certain sports are not included. Mind sports, so Go, the game we talked about in the AI episode, that's not permitted by the Sport Accord or the European Council. So that's actually something. Yeah, it's just excluding all these mind things seems because that whole idea of what you just said, you could do that in Go, like you can do that in these mind games, but just seems very strange that our conceptualization of sport is this physical thing. Because when I think about it, I say I didn't like sport growing up. I loved dodgeball. I loved golf. I loved tennis. I loved badminton. I love hike. I think hiking is essentially it's exercise, but I think it is also sport in the sense you're challenging yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's omitted from the definition that you threw up, really, because I think it
can be personal challenge as well as just competition in general. I mean, outdating a lot of sports. In fact, it's kind of the modern sports themselves. Beaten to it by hunting for sport is an old saying.
Yeah,
quite often, and hunting for sport, shooting. That's not often a very physical exertion as such. Pointing and shooting a gun doesn't require a lot of elevated heart rate.
Sitting and waiting, and lowering your heart rate so you can aim properly as well.
Absolutely,
relaxing.
So for any kind of postmodernists in a way that kind of very snobbing, dismissive of a kind of a classic game or sport, they should probably look to older definitions, really. So I think a lot, everything should qualify. A lot of people are very traditional. People like to categorize things. This cannot qualify as a sport, but often it's for kind of emotional, logical reasons. They shouldn't qualify as a sport because it's not the sport I do and I don't like it very much.
Yeah, it's
pretty poor rationale. It's just as poor as saying that something should be physical.
And I almost want to say that I think. I don't quite want to say this because then it would make the term sport literally meaningless. But I think that at the very least, you can take the best parts of why you do sport and apply them to everyday life. The idea of pushing yourself and challenging yourself, competing even in a very healthy sense. I think you can apply that to everyday life, how you approach tasks and challenges and where you think you're heading, your friendships, things like that. And I think philosophy can inform sport and sport can inform philosophy. And I think if you're doing both of them right, you're doing both simultaneously, I think.
Yeah. So let's then kind of facetiously kind of push the boundaries here of, okay, so what can not qualify as a sport, even in a kind of a loose definition? So let's say if I was to crack open a bottle of cider and drink it on my own, that wouldn't be seen as a sport. However, if I was to race you in a competition to see who could drink their drink the fastest, then that would be under kind of any definition, really. Competitive drinking, just by nature, it's a competition.
Yeah, okay. I think
does it need to be a regulatory board as such?
The problem is, I think I wouldn't go that far, but I would say with that definition, with that example, it's a bit too degenerate. So it's it's the opposite of sport. It's like making yourself unhealthy.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, there we go. So I think sport needs to improve you as a person.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, because even if we take sort of your classic lazy sports, as such, they still require you to kind of concentrate in some kind of way and not just be, I guess, a consumer as such. You're proactive, providing entertainment or service in a competitive environment that's kind of exactly causing you to kind of degenerate and kind of.
Well, I mean, we'll get onto that in the next few episodes, because we'll have people talking about esports, and we'll talk about boxing, and we'll get into more sports. So we've been 2 beers until phronesis. Smash that like button. No, I'm not going to do that. Right. Yeah. Cheers.
Did it record, Connor?